Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of Truth Live. I know the stream just got started, so I'm going to give it a couple minutes to let some folks trickle in. Um, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome all. We are just about to get started here. I'm going to give it another minute or two to let folks trickle in. But I recommend in that time, please read the description so you know what's coming on today's show. We have a really great show for you guys all today. Really wanted to get into some of Stephen Smith's comments on Pod Save America and some of the sharp words that he had for elected Democrats and where to go from here, and really speaking to the power vacuum that it currently exists in the Democratic Party and what it's really going to take for Democrats to recapture the political center and the political momentum that they need to actually defeat Trumpism and the MAGA movement for good. And related to that, although many Democratic leaders have been acting like their hands are tied and have abdicated a lot of their responsibility to getting us out of the mess that they helped us get us into, not all of them are being equally useless. Some of them are trying to do something to help remedy the situation, and no one is doing more than Senator Bernie Sanders, who, yes, is America's most popular senator at the moment, something that would have been unthinkable just even 10 years ago to say, but it's true. So we're going to talk about the anti-oligarchy tour that he's going on, and, you know, what does that mean for the Democratic Party? What examples or lessons are there to be learned? And really also getting into a lot of the reactions that Senator Sanders himself and other Democrats are having to that tour, both positive and negative, because I really think they expose a lot of issues on the left, particularly in how we coalition build and how we message and how we treat our own. And I think it really directly impacts the ways in which people who are opposed to Trumpism, what it's going to take for us to come together in order to defeat this political movement. So now that I've seen a couple more people are coming in, we are going to get started with some of the clips from Stephen A. Smith on Pod Save America. If you haven't already seen it yet, it's a really great watch. I have them here, so we're going to look at those very briefly, and then we're going to get into it and talk about it. I'm going to try and keep the other note I wanted to make about today's live stream is I'm going to try and keep it within the hour, because I know I'm thankful for everyone who's here. I know you guys have very busy lives and whatnot. So I appreciate your coming here, but hopefully we'll be able to get everyone out by 8. But please, as we're talking or as I'm saying things, you can leave questions in the comments. I'm going to get to those at the end. And yeah, they don't just have to be about what we're talking about now. It could be hopefully something that you've seen on my channel, like some of the videos that I posted, whether the long form or the shorts, etc. But you guys should put the questions, any questions or comments you have there, and I'm going to get to it at the end of the live stream. But without further ado, let's go to the Stephen A. Smith video.
Democrats were boring. We're the NBA skills competition where Wemby's cheating, while Trump is the USA-Canada hockey game where there's 3 fights in 10 seconds and you can't look away. And like, I don't know how to compete with that. We don't have a leader who can compete with that. We don't have a party that can compete with that. We don't have a message that can compete with that.
But tell why. You can't compete with that, and you don't have that. I'm not talking about you specifically, of course.
I know.
About the Democratic Party. You don't know that, and you can't compete with that for the biggest reason of all. Because y'all are too busy trying to pick candidates for the American people instead of listening to the American people tell you who they want. The last Democrat that the American people told you they wanted was Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton, it's her turn. Bernie Sanders had momentum. It's Hillary's turn. Joe Biden captured momentum because Representative Clyburn got involved in South Carolina, saved his behind, but it's really his turn, okay? He has no business running for re-election, but everybody went for it, knowing he was supposed to be transitioning. He's going to be 81 years of age. Then you sit up there. He doesn't have a primary. Then he goes on the debate stage, embarrasses himself. Then y'all still let him take 3 damn weeks to walk away instead of getting the hell out there immediately so you can see if there's somebody other than Kamala Harris who could be the Democratic nominee. Then she gets the nomination, and everybody wants to act like she's the rock star all of y'all wanted all along. Oh, my God, let's throw up our hands and just say, hey, she is the one, when you know good and damn well that wasn't the truth. Meanwhile, Trump has been around since 2015. They had Christie, they had Kasich, they had what is it, Fiorini, I believe her name is.
Yep.
You had, later on, you had DeSantis, you had Nikki Haley, you had Ramaswamy, you had all of these people. It didn't matter. We went through lawfare and all this stuff. It didn't matter. They looked the public in the face and they said, we want him. We don't care what y'all want. And forced the Republican Party to capitulate to the demands of their constituency. That's what they did. The Democrats somehow, some way have gotten away with ignoring the constituency and compelling the constituency to capitulate to what they want as a party. And that is the problem. And that's why I said it all needs to go. Some of those candidates need to go. The pundits, the strategists, they need to go. Whoever was involved with the latest election, from a strategy standpoint, every one of them should be fired. Every one of them.
So, yes, very, very choice words and very harsh criticisms from Stephen A. Smith, but I think it's really good, helpful framing in starting our discussion about the Democratic Party and where exactly it goes here. And as I say in all of my shorts, the one comment I pin on all of them, I am not a Democrat. I am a registered independent. I don't really fully believe in the American two-party political system, but we do have two political parties here in America, whether we like it or not. So if we especially don't like what one of them are currently doing right now, the only option tends to be the Democrats. So that is why Stephen A is criticizing them. That's why you'll hear me criticizing them a lot, both on this live, on this channel, and just overall on all of my social medias, because if we want an opposition, that is just where it has to start. I mean, I all credit and power to the people who are trying to organize to build third parties. A lot of respect to the people that are trying to do that. I just do not think, with the way that the institutions are set up in this country, that is a very conducive or helpful place to be directing our energies right now. I think it's almost impossible to get an actual new political party off the ground. So, we're going to have to start doing other things and finding more creative ways to work within the system. But I want to go to what he was talking about with feeling that the Democrats haven't really been all that democratic. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that. This is the criticism that a lot of people had during the primaries that the Democrats had back in 2024. But it's bigger than Kamala. It's bigger than Biden dropping. It's like really definitively ever since 2016, right? Going back to the comment that he said, oh, it's Hillary's turn. This idea that the main way to rise in the Democratic Party, it's not by having the best ideas. It's not by having the most popular movements behind you. It is literally being the person that has the most money, the most access to the movers and shakers, the kingmakers within the party, right? It's like about having establishment ties, establishment connections. That is what merit looks like in that party. And they really thought over the last 10 years, 3 presidential election cycles, that's really all you were going to need in order to compete against Trump, right? They fell into the comfortable delusion that, oh, well, at the end of the day, there are only 2 parties. So people really, really don't like the other side. They're going to have to vote for us, whether they truly like us or not, whether we would have been their first choice or not. And obviously, a lot of us are aware of how Bernie Sanders got sidelined and all of that. But the problem is bigger than just Bernie. It's that you fundamentally have a party that is out of touch with the demands of not just of its voters, but most of the country. And say what you will about Trump, at least, and this is now in 2 out of the 3 presidential cycles he competed in, he won his own primaries fair and square. Voters time and time again had the choice to reject him. Voters within his own party had the choice to reject him, and they stayed aboard the Trump train. Mind you, that is one of my most severe criticisms of the American evangelicals that have been supporting him. A lot of you guys I know came from my how MAGA corrupted the American church. Because what you'll hear a lot of those people say, and I've been seeing a lot of it in the comments under really all my YouTube videos, but particularly that one, about how, we have to vote Republican because these are the only people that support us on X, Y, and Z issue. And the problem with that, and how you know that argument is a lie, it's like, okay, well, if we're really about just the issue, each time there was at least a dozen other Republican candidates who would have given you what you wanted on abortion, who would have given you what you wanted on gay marriage, their school choice, whatever the conservative political issue is. There were multiple people who were willing to give you that. But when all was said and done, you still decided time and time again, overwhelmingly, to support the weird orange guy. So, I mean, it's like that tells you everything you need to know about what was really motivating the choice. They might have other reasons that they don't want to state clearly for why they were supporting Trump, but they weren't just doing it because he was the only person that, fulfilled their that really scratched that Christian conservative itch for supporting X, Y, and Z policy. But all that to say that for whatever the reasons people supported him, actual voters in primaries actually did support him. For really, I think, perverse and terrible reasons, he ended up being incredibly popular. Despite never having historically been a Republican, despite not having any kind of conservative values, really for almost all of his life, being the New York real estate mogul, despite basically being an atheist and living his life as like worse than a pagan in terms of all of his marriages and divorces and affairs. I mean, just genuinely living a scandalous life, was still nonetheless able to command a ton of power, a ton of respect within the Republican primary field. And of course, the last Democratic candidate that the Democrats have been able to find that has mustered anything like that type of popular support was Barack Obama. And if you guys are old enough, for the people that are old enough to remember the 2008 campaign, I mean, you sort of remember the sense of magic that was in the air. You remember the sense of possibility that was in the air. And now all of that is not only gone. I mean, the problem is, I think, a lot of the despair that's taken place for the anti-Trump coalition. It's not just that we currently don't have anyone that is able to, meaningfully oppose Trump or has the power, has the platform to do it. It's just the total lack of prospects of any person like that emerging. So, in desperation, people are turning to very unorthodox figures, right? That's how we got here in the first place. People wanted to change candidate. They said politics as usual isn't working, so let's try and do something different. So they went with the insane real estate developer slash TV star, reality TV star from New York. And now some people on the left are throwing out other crazy options like Mark Cuban. And the reason why Stephen Smith was on that podcast was because he was largely there to talk about a lot of the rumors and the whole social media organic campaign that's cropped up around wanting to make him the Democratic nominee in 2028. And Stephen A., this is the last clip I'll play from Stephen A. It's a little bit shorter, but this is what he had to say about a lot of those rumors, or really about the desire of a lot of people wanting to see him throw his hat into politics. So hear what he has to say about that and the indictment that he thinks it is against the broader Democratic establishment.
Let me end it by saying this to you. Covering sports, you can have great players, right? Why would the owner not be satisfied? Because they're always looking for somebody box office. Winning is one thing that's very, very important because obviously you win during the regular season, you win through the playoffs, you play more games, you generate more revenue because you have more games to play. But nothing beats somebody who's a box office attraction because folks walk through the turnstiles if for no other reason to see him. And what I'm saying to you is, I'm not talking about a bunch of manufactured audiences like you had at the DNC in Chicago. That's not what I'm talking about, okay? I'm talking about somebody that Obama was, for example, in 2008, where ultimately he elevated to rock star status, where no matter where he went or what he had to say, the camera was a magnet for him. And then obviously you got to follow through with the message and you got to follow through with practice. All of that's true. But you got to get somebody with sizzle. You got to get somebody that when they speak, they influence minds, they influence hearts, and they get people to really, really think and spin their wheels. I'm talking about not people on the left because you got them. I'm talking about the independents. I'm talking about the centrists. You got to get somebody that can speak to that audience, that can go across the aisle and dare Republican constituency to bet against them because guess what? I'm better than the candidate that you have because I'm going to look out for you better than the candidate that you have because that's what Trump was telling a bunch of black folks, Hispanic folks. What do you have to lose and all of this other stuff? This is what Trump did. He was fearless with it. Where are those Democrats? I don't see them around. That's why I'm a damn candidate because of that. It's embarrassing. I want to make sure America understands this. I believe it is an utter embarrassment to the Democratic Party that I am a candidate in people's eyes for the presidency of the United States. It's an indictment against them, and they need to get their act together before somebody like me or somebody else takes it real seriously and says the hell with y'all, because the roster that I'm seeing right now, y'all don't have anything.
So yeah, that was again very choice words from Stephen A. And yeah, I mean he kind of said it perfectly there. The only thing that I worry about, with even people floating ideas of him being a candidate, is because Democrats have two problems. One is like the substance, like the policies, right? It's like, what actual vision of America are you fighting for? What is your political vision for the country? That's one. But then the second is style. And I would say in our 24/7 media coverage, social media dominated world, your style and the way you present things matters just as much, if not dramatically more, than anything that you're saying. And if you look at the two most successful political figures of the 21st century in American politics, Donald Trump and Obama, in very different ways, they epitomized like highly stylized approaches to politics. I mean, so stylized that their very manner of presenting became iconic. I mean, that's why you see all the 1,000,001 impressions of Trump and Obama. I mean, just the way that they talk and the way that they speak and the way that they show up in the world became so much of a trademark for them. But the problem with that is once you reduce everything to style and become totally devoid of substance, we're just doubling down on the things that got us to Trump. It's like we are already living in the WWE presidency. I mean, you have all these ridiculous gimmicks that the people in him, that Trump and all the people in his administration are doing right now, bringing a chainsaw to the CPAC convention, the Homeland Security Secretary using a flamethrower on like a pile of government regulations or something to show they were cutting things, Trump signing executive orders in a stadium, like the first day or two of his presidency. It's like, I'm not really sure how much further we want to go in that direction. I mean, thinking that we're just going to get our own media personality like a Stephen A. Smith in power, and that's going to undo all the damage from Trump, I think is a little bit short-sighted, to say the least. But all that to say, so yes, we heard all the rebukes from Bernie Sanders, and I see the comments here, and I'm going to get to them. Let me try and get through some of the stuff that I had before on Bernie Sanders, and then I'll come back to the things that I'm seeing in the comments, because you guys have some really interesting thoughts over there. But what I'll say right now is that, not all the Democratic politicians are equally unpopular. So as I mentioned before, and I'll share my screen just so that we're all on the same page of what I'm talking about. You see that Bernie Sanders, like I said, is doing his anti-oligarchy tour. He's crisscrossing the United States, particularly places that the Democrats lost to Trump, like places that voted blue in 2020 that then voted for Trump in the last election. And he wants to explain what he thinks is going wrong there. And let me show you some of the results that he is having with all of that. Let me see if I can find the video. Just look at Bernie in Iowa City. It's a very short video. It's only a few seconds. And then we also have Bernie Sanders in Omaha, where I believe this crowd was about 2,000 people. So let's look at that very briefly, just to see the excitement that he got. So yeah, like I said, not all Democratic politicians are equally unpopular. I mean, Bernie Sanders is out here, crisscrossing the entire country and just getting insane reactions from people. So I don't know. Maybe the Dems should try and do a little bit more of that. Let's see some other positive commentary on Bernie's Iowa tour. hold on. There's one tweet in particular that I'm looking for, and I want to see if I can find it. Okay, we're gonna find it. So yeah, we have this one over here about how Bernie just launched this tour, and it's literally like the only popular thing that the Democrats have done. I want to say in years, but certainly ever since Trump was elected, at a time when literally the Senate minority leader, the House minority leader, they're literally struggling over how to message, and Bernie is just mopping the floor with them. There's also another really good tweet about this. Let's see if I can find her over here. Not about the tour in general, but it's just about how Bernie's social media presence, as you can see here, almost like every other video he does gets like 10 million views on YouTube and TikTok and all these things. And he's just such a competent and effective communicator of democratic ideals. And this man is 83 years old. He's 83. I know we talked a lot about age being a problem when Biden was in the race, and still talk about it with Pelosi and all these geriatrics running Congress. But, age is not necessarily the reason why a lot of these politicians are ineffective and unpopular. It certainly doesn't help 9 times out of 10. But even with a significant age barrier, that has not prevented Bernie from being able to connect with people. Okay. So those are just some of the things that I want to share. I'm going to try and get through this content a little bit quickly because I want to deal with a lot of your things in the comments. And also, hey, everyone who's joined since then, like I said this at the beginning of the live stream, but if you guys have any comments or questions or things that you want me to talk about, just please dump them in the comments, and I will get to them towards the end. So we can just go through and talk about what you guys are interested in talking about. I also want to talk about the stuff that I'm interested in talking about, which is why I'm just trying to get through this stuff because there's a really important point that I want to build to, and there's a reason why I'm bringing up Bernie and all these other candidates, because I think there are a lot of important lessons. So the most important thing that I want to talk about is not the positive acclaim that Bernie is getting, but more so a lot of the negative attention and negative coverage he's getting from people on the left. So I'm not sure how closely you guys have been following some of the foreign policy news, but the long story short is that Trump is, as predicted, basically selling out Ukraine to the Russians. And I don't want to get into all the politics of the Ukraine war. The only thing I'll say about it now, so that we can understand the criticism that Bernie is getting, is that I think when we talk about this issue, just generally in American society, we do a very bad job of, there are two distinct moral and political issues tied up in the discussion of the war. It's one, the morality of Ukraine's war against Russia, and then B, the practicality of the United States indefinitely bankrolling said war against Russia. On the first question, I don't think there can really be any doubt, morally speaking, that obviously Ukraine's in the right and that they were mostly just minding their business and Russia invaded. And I know the argument about NATO provocation and we were expanding on their borders and how would the US like it if, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I understand all of that. But being provoked is not a good enough reason to go invade someone else's entire country and kill millions of people. So that is why that argument is not really great on the morality part of it. But then the second part, which is where we can have a lot more, which I believe we can have a lot more reasonable political disagreements over, is, okay, well, what should the extent of America's commitment to funding and financing and supplying the Ukraine war actually be? So if we already have so many problems at home and the war isn't cheap, right? It's not like this is a rounding error in the federal budget. It's like we've committed hundreds of billions of dollars to fighting this war overseas. And I think people are right to wonder, what would it look like if we spent a fraction of that budget at home? Like I told you guys on the last live stream in this paper that I'm writing about Dr. King and his views on foreign policy, particularly his criticism of the Vietnam War. He had that very famous comment where he said, a national budget is a moral document. The more that you are allocating resources to one thing is less time, money, resources, and attention you're allocating to something else. So every dollar that you're spending on financing wars are dollars you're not spending on hospitals, schools, et cetera, et cetera. I bring all of that context up just so that when I present some of the criticisms that Bernie has been getting, you guys will see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to try and go through those pretty quickly just to give you a sample of what has been said about Bernie. Some pretty harsh words by people on the left. So I want, because Bernie came out with a video, and you're going to see this in the screenshots of it. You're going to see it in the video. But Bernie came out with a video where he made his own thoughts clear on it. He was basically accusing Trump of selling out Ukraine to Putin, which he did. But it was really the response that he got. It was the response that he got that I thought was really interesting. So let me start presenting that right now. We'll go through those pretty quickly. Hold on. Where is it? Sorry, I'm just pulling it up. Just give me a second. Okay. So yeah, this was the video. Hold on. It's not showing yet. So this was the video that Bernie had made about his support for the war. And then you see one of the commentators here calling Bernie a pro-war neocon who wants a never-ending conflict, and accuses him of being a traitor to the working class. Okay, that's one. Let's try and see another one. We have over here that Bernie calls Putin a dictator, but has no words for Zelensky, who was canceled elections, echoing Trump's comments on calling Zelensky a dictator, which is insane, as Bernie addresses in this video, but a little bit beside the point. And calling Bernie a hypocritical clown. Okay, we're still going. We have one more. And then we have this one over here. Let me get it up on the screen. That Bernie Sanders is the ultimate symbol of the Democratic Party's long con. Fraud, gaslighting, performative virtue. He was never a revolutionary, just a loyal prop in the deception. So the reason why I'm bringing all of these comments up is because I think this is one of the major ways. I don't want to use the word left because I think that even just comes with too many political associations. Let's just say the anti-Trump political coalition. These are the ways in which we shoot ourselves in the foot, right? That's why I started with the Stephen A. Smith stuff. That's why I started with showing the reaction Bernie was getting in this rally to fight oligarchy and the tour he was doing around the United States, because this is the person who has done by far the most. Maybe AOC is like a close second, but the person who by far has done the most within the last decade to normalize, more left-wing economic populism, make those ideas mainstream, make them popular. Like I said, he's the most popular senator right now, and Congress overall has, I think, a single-digit approval rating. So for all of the causes that people who are opposed to Trump and people like him, who are opposed to everything that they stand for, Bernie has been one of the most effective, love him or hate him. You can't deny that he's been one of the most effective advocates for changing the political conversation and getting people on board with his ideas. The hard work of building consensus, creating a popular movement supported by real people, grassroots, organic, from the ground up, the same way he did both of his primary races in 2016 and 2020 by trying to crowdsource funding and get, the popular will of the people behind him. So he's done more than anyone else to make these ideas mainstream. And now, because of a political disagreement, and that's why I gave all the context about the nuances of the Ukraine conflict in particular. I'm not saying you have to agree with his line on that. And I also have my own strong reservations about the wisdom of just an indefinite, blank check for a war half a world away. We can disagree on that. But to see the strength of the condemnation that was being leveled against Bernie by people on the left, I think that was something that was very troubling for me to see, right? It was really troubling. And it's not just happened to Bernie. This has also happened to, let's see if I can find it, AOC. This has happened to AOC. A lot of people have, let me try and find those tweets. I'll get them up on the screen just to show you guys briefly. And then there's also a video of her getting heckled, particularly for her Gaza stance. But let me show you guys just some of these tweets, just to give you like a flavor of the things that were said about her. Because similar to Bernie, she's been the person, it's just been those two primarily who have done more than anyone else to communicate, to win people to their side, to make their causes popular. And this is the sort of reaction that they're getting. So I'm just going to show it very, very briefly. So we have the first one here about how AOC didn't sell out. She was always CIA. That's, talk about wanting to put a harsh point on it. And then there's another one. Like I said, I'm going to try and get through these quickly. Yeah, this is for when AOC, I think, was like right after the election, or maybe right before. It was right after the election when she wanted to get that steering committee appointment. And she said that she, was not going to get behind primary challenges to her Democratic colleagues, which, again, you can disagree with, from a political and moral standpoint. But again, it's just being so quick to totally discard this person who still is integral to the movement of creating a new political coalition that does not include far-right extremism. So, just another person on the left just strongly condemning her. And then the last one I'll show, hold on, let me find it. We just have one more. Yes, where AOC has been kissing establishment butt her entire time at Congress, and what a sellout. So this is the language, y'all. Sorry, I didn't show the tweet. Here's the tweet, which basically just said what I voiced over. So yeah, this is what we're dealing with. And then there was also, I said I was also going to show the heckling video. Let me show that to you guys now. It's short. It's only like 20 seconds. But just to see the sort of treatment that she was getting. This was around, I believe, in August, right before the election, where she was getting heckled by some pro-Gaza posters. Just look at the tone and the language.
Don't touch me. Don't touch me. You want to touch me. You think so? Okay, say. How many more kids have to die to call a genocide? Don't touch me. How many more kids? Get out of here. How many more kids, AOC? How many more kids have to die for you to call it a genocide? How many more kids? Don't touch me. How many more kids have to die for you to call it a genocide? Hey, how many more kids have to die? Tell me how many more kids. How many more? How many more? 10,000 more, 20,000. How many kids have to die?
Okay, so you guys got the idea. And the crazy thing about that is the crazy thing about the accusation that she was getting specifically about calling the Gaza conflict a genocide is that she already did that. She had already done that months earlier in March from the floor of Congress, no less. She had done that. She had called for the stopping of arms sales to Israel during the war. She had done all of these things. I'm assuming that protester was not aware of those. And yet that was the way that she was being treated, right? So this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. I'll tell you something about the Republicans. If anyone knows how to do coalition building, it's them. And this goes all the way back to Reagan. It goes back to the moral majority. They took social, like religious conservatives. They took economic libertarians. They took foreign policy neoconservatives, and they put them all in one political party and formed a political coalition that mostly seamlessly worked together for almost half a century to achieve, frankly, all of its political goals. Even look at the elevation of Donald Trump. I mentioned, and that's why I mentioned earlier in this live stream, a man who had never been a Republican or conservative his entire life, didn't have any shred of genuine Christian faith, was not ideologically committed to anything within the conservative movement, but you saw lifelong conservatives for the last 10 years now, from 2015 to this year, fully get on the Trump train, not because he was the person that most aligned with, their ideal ideological candidate, but because they saw he could win. That is what conservatives are so good at doing that non-conservatives are not. I mean, the left has been criticized historically for the very rigorous ideological purity tests, and that's bad enough. But when you see people on your own side using said purity tests to not just tear down their own, but to tear down, like I said, the people who have been most instrumental in changing the political landscape in the left's favor, in the anti-Trump coalition's favor, you're running into suicidal levels of political self-sabotage. And that's what's really concerning to me. There's one tweet I want to show that has a quote from Reagan, shockingly, if you can believe it, that I think really applies here. So I'm going to share that one now. And it says, Ronald Reagan said, "The person who agrees with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally, not a 20% traitor." And this tweet goes on to say, like, yeah, although like Reagan is kind of terrible, they understood the efficacy of coalition building in politics, meaning that it's not the most important thing that we agree with each other all the time, but we should not focus on those disagreements to the point where it prevents us from building a durable coalition, to actually, defeat the other side, so to speak. So I'm wishing Bernie luck on that, the tour that he's doing. And I'm hoping that he's successful in convincing more people and changing more hearts and minds to see that there is an alternative to political change that doesn't require enabling or embracing fascism. Yeah, I'm going to highlight this comment. Thank you, Elle. There are countries that have a vested interest in stoking divisions within the United States. There's a lot of people out there who want that for America, and they want us to be divided in general, right? So they want us to be divided like left versus right. That's certainly how things break down in this country. But even within political factions, they want us to be divided amongst ourselves so that most people can't come together with a sense of common decency and common sense in order to try and make the country better. That's like the last thing that they want to see. So, okay, I'm mostly at the end of the main things that I wanted to talk about for today. So I'm going to start going through some of these comments. And guys, if you have more things that you want to talk about, please just put them in the comments. I'm just going to start going through them and speaking about them at a little bit greater length for the rest of the hour. So starting with Deb, I'd be really interested in hearing more about your theory about the stark spirituality being the draw for conservatives to Trump. Well, absolutely. Yeah. If you guys are wondering what Deb is referencing here, I was explaining on last week's live, at least from a Christian perspective, the way that I think trying to explain the reasons why Trump is as popular as he is on the right. Because, and I've had this experience many times, when you actually talk to most Trump supporters and you actually, with, genuine curiosity and gentleness and intrigue, and you're trying to ask them, okay, well, what exactly are your reasons for supporting Trump? And you go through one by one, and usually half the times the opinion will be based on some form of like misinformation, right? Like, oh, there's hundreds of thousands of criminals and people from insane asylums in Guatemala coming into the country. So the first level is getting past all of that. But then once you get through that, and you even get some supporters who are willing to concede or admit, okay, maybe this isn't totally factual, it doesn't do anything to actually change their support for him. So the analogy I was making, and I think it's more than an analogy, I think it's a spiritual reality, is I think it is a dark spiritual power. It's almost like a soul tie between Trump and his supporters, and you can even just see this in the sort of ecstatic glee they have for him. Like, you just like watch these rallies, It makes me think of Gustave Le Bon, the mob, just the sort of irrationality that consumes masses of people acting in unison like this. It's like they lose their individual personality and they just give over their selves, their psyche, their souls, their minds to this mass movement. And it's really just, if you're just hearing the chants, you're hearing what's being said, it's really just an orgy of hatred, an orgy of cruelty, violence, just a celebration of the worst that there is in the human spirit, because that's really what Trump represents. And you can just tell there's this ecstatic thrill that Trump supporters get out of their association with this man, out of supporting him, in ways that there's no amount of logic, there's no amount of argument, there's no sort of evidence you can show them. And this is why people consistently call it a cult, because it's an irrational, it's at the same time deeply irrational and deeply psychological, like emotional. So there is no reasoning through it with most of these people. And even when they have negative experiences with Trump, like let's say he takes away some program that a lot of them need or like, or just generally they don't do well under his presidency, there are always ways to rationalize and explain away why things are the way that they are. So I do believe that Trump has tapped into part of how you can explain his appeals, that I think he's tapped into, unconsciously, of course, but darker spiritual forces, because that's what he represents. It's similar in the same way. There's several thinkers who have done this in analyzing the rise of Hitler in Germany, and you can even see this if you've watched or seen clips of like Hitler's speeches, just in the sort of manic state he would be in when he would speak, and just how he would present himself. Other people have noticed how in some ways he was like reflecting this like dark part of the Germans. It's kind of Freudian and psychoanalytic, but bear with me. I think it is helpful in thinking about it. But he was this external manifestation of like this dark repressed part of the German psyche that just burst forth onto the national stage. So a lot of the enthusiastic, ecstatic support that he was getting from people was because of this really intense and I would say dark spiritual psychological bond that they were creating with this man. He was speaking in a way where if you just saw some random person on the street talking like this, you would assume that person was mentally insane. But in the right circumstances, given that platform, given that audience, and given the zeitgeist, the mood of the country at that time, it deeply connected with something in their psyches, and I believe in their souls, something really dark. And the reason why they hadn't connected with it previously was that it was rightfully repressed, right? All these sorts of authoritarian figures, particularly the ones that succeed through popular movements. I'm not talking about the generals that do a coup or seize power and some violent takeover. The people that need to engage the will of the masses to take over, particularly by getting them to endorse or support morally reprehensible things, that is going to require a level of spiritual engagement from the leader with their followers. So I hope that was a helpful summary of some of the thoughts that I had there. And there's more I could say on that because it's really interesting. And I also think really important for thinking about, okay, because just how in the same way you can create these sort of dark spiritual attachments, you can also create positive, healthy, and holy ones. And we've also seen this in our history. The one that is the closest in our lifetimes that we have seen, as I mentioned before, is the Obama 2008 campaign, the hope and change. You have the sense of possibility. It feels like everything can happen. And there were a lot of people who strongly identified with the Obama campaign, particularly in that one election. A little bit also in 2012, but it was really 2008 where the undistilled magic was still present. And of course, the example that sticks out most to me from American history is the example of Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, just the way that his words touched the hearts, minds, and souls of an entire nation. I mean, when he was giving the I Have a Dream speech, Coretta Scott King, in reflecting on what it was like to be there, she said, and I quote, she's like, "It felt like the kingdom of God had appeared in that moment." Like they were living in this utopian end time where God had come down and repaired the creation, made it whole, where all of the poetic language and imagery that King was invoking, let justice roll down like a mighty stream. The people living in darkness had seen a great light. All the words and the promises from the Hebrew prophets, it felt real. And you could tell it was real because it moved an entire nation that was deeply intransigent, deeply stuck in its ways, and wanting to commit itself to a dark path, despite the resistance he encountered, still nonetheless moved, albeit reluctantly and with great difficulty, in the direction of greater justice, greater equality, greater inclusivity. So it's possible. And this even ties back to what Stephen A was saying, is that what the Democrats need to, or the opposition to Trump needs to find a way of finding leaders who create these positive, healthy spiritual bonds with their followers and with voters. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Deb. Okay, and then we have this one from Blood Rain. Not sure what your real name is. The Jewish people wanting to free Barabbas instead of Jesus. They could have chosen the way of Jesus, but didn't want to be on God's time. They wanted things done on their time. I'm forgetting exactly what I was talking about when you made this comment, but I agree in principle with that. And there were a lot of people who in my MAGA evangelical video who made the same point and saying like what the country basically did on a national scale was choosing Barabbas. Not that I want to make Kamala or Biden or the establishment Dems out to be the Jesus, quote unquote, in this situation. But I think it communicates the point that we had a choice as a country. There's never been an election where the consequences, the results, the moral and spiritual implications of our decisions were more clear. That's why I said, unlike in 2016, there were no innocent explanations for Trump getting away this time. We could comfort ourselves in the aftermath of 2016 and 2020 that, okay, yeah, maybe a few people were deceived into believing Trump meant any of the things that he said, or that who would be capable of changing the country in a positive way. But luckily, we came to our senses in 2020 and got rid of him in light of everything that we've known about him, seen about him, particularly after he lost that election and decided that a coup would be the best way to deal with the situation. So in 2024, we couldn't say that anymore, right? It's like we knew everything we needed to know about him and chose to do it and chose to go back to him anyway. So in that sense, I really do think it was a Barabbas over Jesus kind of moment. And then Blood Rain had extra context for those of you who aren't aware. So, I mean, the additional context for this is that at the time of right before Jesus was crucified, when the chief priests had turned against him and were trying to get the Roman government to kill him and presented him to Pilate, the Roman governor, where he was living, Pilate had a tradition where each year, at Passover each year, because that's when Jesus was arrested and killed, the week of Passover, he would release to the Jews, because ancient Israel at this time was under Roman occupation. So they were an occupied people. So these were the sort of compromises they had to make with their oppressors in order to keep peace in the region, which is all Rome was interested in. So Pilate had a tradition of releasing a prisoner back to the Jewish people. They had all they had to do was pick one. You tell me who you want to release, and we'll give them back to you. Jesus had been arrested at that point, and the chief priests conspired to, instead of releasing Jesus, who the crowd generally liked because, he had done cool things like feed the hungry and heal people and generally had a good reputation, but he was a threat to the religious elite's power. They said, actually, no, let's go with this insurrectionist who had led an insurrection against Rome, which Rome took very seriously as an empire, where people had died. So effectively a murderer. And they took him, the crowd, thanks to the instigation of the chief priests, took him over Jesus. So that's where the analogy comes from. Just wanted to offer that background for people who are not as familiar. And now we have another comment from Deb. Believe we would have had a very different country right now if the Democrats would have listened to us and Bernie had been allowed to run. Well, that's the thing. And this goes to the sort of subtle propaganda of our system. and how it works really through the illusion of choice, right? Because, if you don't give people an actual choice, then that just really feels undemocratic. That really feels authoritarian. But what they did is that they allowed him to run. They just did everything within their power to throw their institutional support, behind candidates, establishment candidates that were to their liking, that they picked, right? So in 2016, 2020, they let him run. But in 2016, a lot of the help that the establishment got was from the superdelegates. Clinton had basically all of them locked up before the primaries had even begun. Joe Biden had to fight for his a little bit more in 2020, and he was only saved around March after the South Carolina primary, going into Super Tuesday, because Bernie was on a tear before then, and they realized, like, oh God, if we don't do something now, like, at a minimum, this could be a contested convention, and we're gonna have to, like, fight it out on the floor of the convention, like how we did back in the old days, right? So they did a coordinated drop. People behind the scenes were making calls. Obama was making calls. I had a tweet about this because someone just wrote something about this the other day, and it was just very annoying. So I think I wrote about it on Twitter. Maybe I can't find it right now. But anyway, so yeah, all these coordinated drops, all this, stuff going on behind the scenes. So of course they don't want it to make it look explicitly rigged. So they let him run and they go through the whole formal process. But behind the scenes, they're doing everything that they can to make sure he doesn't actually have a fair shot of winning. And granted, let me be the devil's advocate for a second, and say, let me be sympathetic and say that I understand why they might have thought, giving them the most charitable interpretation of their actions possible. They might have thought that, okay, well, Bernie is so far left that the country isn't ready for someone that, quote unquote, radical in that way, in that direction. So if we let him run, it's basically like we're basically signing up for Trump 2.0. We're going to get a second term of Trump, and that has to be avoided at all costs. So yes, is it a little bit undemocratic what we're choosing to do? Absolutely. But what would be even worse is if we produced an outcome where Trump was reelected as president. And of course, the irony is that they did all of that and Trump got elected anyway. Even if Bernie had more than that, him coming back to power now instead of when he would have in 2020, or even in 2016, stopping him from coming to power in the first place at all, when the country was really ready for something revolutionary, right? Which is why they decided to go with Trump in the first place. So there were two things that made this particularly bad, right? That first, they deprived the country of a genuine contest between right-wing populism and left-wing populism. Those would have been that would have been a perfect testing ground to really see at the end of the day, what are American people going to go with? We don't have that information right now. Trump has only ever ran against, in a row, 3 heavily establishment, moderate, let's just call it, be frank, conservative candidates. They're conservatives. We don't have a liberal or left party in America. We have a conservative party and we have a far right party. I didn't realize that until it was actually a few years back. I saw a video of Peter Hitchens describing the Tory party in the UK, just very descriptively. He had more sharper criticisms of them, but he's like, they're generally like pro-equality, diversity, for climate change, just like at a high level, like vague cliches about all these things. And I'm like, oh my God, what he's describing is the Democratic Party. But in England, those are the conservatives, right? So we haven't actually had a genuine leftist run against Trump. And now we've been deprived of that information, which is vital in having this fight against fascism in this country. The second thing is that at least starting at 2020, if Trump had become if Trump had been reelected then, he would have been a far less dangerous threat than he is right now. People forget in his first term, he did not have full control over his own administration because he hadn't solidified his control over the Republican Party. He had made a ton of compromises with the establishment Republicans, which is why he basically fired everybody that was in his first cabinet and would also fire their replacements. He was just going through people left and right because time and time again, he would tell them or ask them to do crazy things. And these people who were just normal public servants with a sense of like dignity, decency, and sense of identity would refuse to go along with it. Trump would get angry and they would either resign or he would fire them. So that just went on constantly. Like all these vagabonds and randos that he's putting in positions now, he wanted some of those people in his first term, and the people back then stopped him. Like the person who, Kash Patel, our current FBI director, God help us. It was the Gina Haspel, who was CIA director, and Bill Barr, who was Attorney General at the time, basically said they would quit. Like they put their feet down and said, "You're not going to hire this man." Back when Trump wanted him to be deputy director of the FBI, and it quietly didn't happen. There were a million things like that behind the scenes, behind closed doors, crises that were averted because the people within Trump's own administration were pushing back against him. All of that is gone. The guardrails are gone. Those were the most effective guardrails that we actually had in place because the Republicans in Congress weren't going to do anything. The courts were unreliable, and even the Supreme Court gets to choose what cases it hears on its docket. So it's not even clear that many of the legal issues that are currently being created under Trump, if they don't want to take these cases, they don't have to take them, but they might. They want to resolve it in Trump's favor. But anyway, the point is that all of those guardrails are gone, to the point where if Trump had won in 2020, it would have been closer to a continuation of his first term than what we have right now, where he had 4 years to go away and start from scratch. He completed his takeover of the Republican Party. He purged all opposition from the party, both in the executive branch and in the legislative branch. And he had all of his most extreme advisors formulate a plan. They had 4 years to formulate a plan of everything they were going to do when they came back to power, which they're currently doing. That's what Project 2025 is and was. That's what, people were, like myself, were constantly trying to warn people about at the time. So, yeah, there were a lot of downstream effects of what the Democrats chose to do with Bernie. And who knows if he actually would have won. Regardless of what the actual election outcomes were, I think he would have fared far better than both Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, and even Joe Biden. People forget, like, Joe Biden was never a popular political candidate. Even in 2020, where he won, and he took that as some kind of mandate for leadership, he came roughly 40,000 votes in 4 states from losing that election. And that's when Trump was at the bottom of his popularity. Like, the world was on fire, once in a century pandemic, the fabric of society unraveling, the worst protests we'd seen since the 1960s. And he just squeaked it out. So yes, it's sad to imagine what our country could be. Yes to the age comment as well, Deb. And yeah, you could say that again about there being, I would call it more than a glut. I mean, I think the number is 41%. We don't know where 41% of the money that we give to the DoD goes. I think they're the only government agency that has never passed an audit. But those are dangerous questions to ask in this country. I mean, like, physically dangerous now that we live in a society where, whistleblowers can just openly get popped, and we all just sort of move on. We all just accept it, whether it's the Boeing one or the OpenAI one, and, not just one, not just two, it'll be multiple. And then, that's just sort of it. So, but yes, I agree. There's certainly a glut there. Is that a kind of spiritual contagion, Al? I think this is going back to the dark spiritual bond I was talking about. Yeah, I think that's one way. I think that's one way to describe it. There was actually a really great article I read, I think it was about a year back now, but it was talking about the harshness of the Old Testament laws towards sin. Particularly, all the rules are about, like, you have to purge the evil from among you. Like, you have to find the people who are violating these community norms, who are engaging in the sin, and you have to, like, separate them from the community. And the analogy that they made is that what the writers of the Old Testament understood about sin is that it is contagious. The reason why it's so dangerous is because how easy it is for one person, particularly in a community, because when we're in a community, because of how social human beings are wired to be, the actions of one person or a group of people can easily rub off on the rest of other people. And especially when you get into the psychology of mass movements and mobs, well, yeah, you have a super spreader. If we're going to use the contagion analogy, you have these super spreader events where the whole purpose is to make as many people in that event, in that room, in that space, sort of catch the same spiritual and psychological wave, so they can all be, so they can all ride that wave together. So, yeah, I think that's totally right. And yeah, this is also why it's why we have to guard our hearts. And we have to guard everything that we allow to fester in our hearts, like watching our minds, watching our thoughts, watching our intentions, being ruthlessly honest with ourselves about all those things. Because as Jesus said, it's the things that come out of a person that defile them, not what goes in. And that's what he was saying in the Sermon on the Mount, right? He's like, people don't know it, but you have murder, you have adultery, you have greed, you have idolatry, you have all of these things stored up in your heart. And they are just waiting for the right experiential triggers in your reality in order to come out. So you don't really actually know. And then this, again, goes into the principle of not judging, right? The reason why you can't judge other people, and we've heard this expression, right? The reason why you can't judge other people's sin is because, there, but for the grace of God, go I. You just tweak circumstances just a little bit, and we could easily get the same sort of responses and reactions out of you because you are ignorant about what is in your own heart and what your own soul. And when those things are exposed, when those things are brought to light, it's your job to interrogate them and correct them, not just give in to them. That's been a central failing of Trumpism. It's like the total shamelessness, the shameless indulgence in sin. Effectively, it's like, yeah, we know it's bad, but we're just going to keep doing it because we like it. I'm like, that is deeply, deeply, deeply troubling. So is the darkness already there? Yes, Deb, to answer your question, the darkness is already there. And I wouldn't say, and I'll have a lot more to say about this in the future because I'm working on another video. It's in the beginning stages right now, but I'm just ideating about why true Christians are going to be needed in this political revolution. So, like, love what Bernie Sanders and AOC and all these people are doing and just creating alternatives. But if we don't have a Christ-centered approach, both in our beliefs and our actions and our means and our methods, we're never going to fully get out of the political crisis that we are in right now. What do I mean by that? Again, a lot of this comes back to the MLK stuff I'm reading, which is also a work of spiritual labor for me as well. I'm really reflecting on, how did this man tap into the eternal truths of Christianity to deliver positive social change in ways that brought the current world as it is more into harmony with the prophetic vision that we see in the Bible, particularly from the Hebrew prophets, from Jesus himself. And in the New Testament about the ministry of reconciliation, how Jesus came to seek and save the lost, how he came to make all things new, how the great light has dawned to show people a better way. Even when we have the right ideas, the spirit which we perform them in, communicate them in, relate to other people, how we relate to other people with them, that all matters. So, and this is something I struggle with too. So I'm certainly I'm not perfect in any of these things, but I think it's a matter of eternal vigilance for all of us who think of ourselves as Christians, to not just have the right ideas, but to make sure we are communicating them with gentleness, respect, charity, and with love, fundamentally, because that's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So there's darkness in all of us. And even particularly when we see people doing things that are offensive to us, outrageous to us, it's really easy to start stewing in those dark, negative emotions and acting out on them. We get angry, we get hateful, we get bitter, but that darkness is not going to drive out darkness. Again, very famous MLK quote, only light can do that. Only love can do that. Hatred won't drive out hatred. Evil won't drive out evil. That's why the Apostle Paul says, reject every kind of evil. We don't get to choose a lesser of two or try and use evil as a means to accomplish our goals. So I'm very glad you asked that question, because just because we're not like quote unquote those people who do those bad things does not mean that at all that we are morally exempt from the temptation to be bad. The worst, the most dangerous seduction when it comes to the interpersonal violence that we do with our words and actions to other people is to behave badly, to behave with cruelty and hatred directed at other people, and be thinking the whole time that we're actually being righteous for doing so. That is something we have to be, and that's why I was showing a lot of these comments about these people on the left who are criticizing Bernie and just really hateful and angry words. That I really try and refrain from doing. And if you guys see me doing that, I hope you would hold me accountable and say, hey, you know, this isn't really a really Christian way to do that. Maybe you should be less angry or less judgmental or whatever it is. It's something I'm working on, like I said. Thank you, JD Voice. What's that? I'm trying to see if I missed anything. Thank you, Elle. You are very kind. Dan, I'm going to... What are your thoughts on revolutionary politics, and is this time for one? That I will get at in the video where I talk about why Christians are needed for the revolutionary political change that I'm referencing. Hint, it's not a revolution in the typical ways people are associated with. It's not a violent revolution. It's supposed to be a revolution of peace. It's supposed to be a revolution of love. Most fundamentally, it's supposed to be a movement of direct nonviolent action, a tradition that we have largely lost in the United States, that MLK perfected. And we are just like a generation adrift, not knowing how to utilize all of the crafts, the gifts that were left by our forefathers who said, this is the way, walk in it. This is how you make change in your country. The analogy that I was thinking of for that video, it's like, and the analogy I was thinking of, it's for people specifically who think that like nonviolent protest doesn't work. The way that we're doing it right now certainly doesn't work. I can tell you that, but that's not how the people who enabled us to create the society that we currently live in, that's not how they saw nonviolent protest. Nonviolent didn't mean passive. It was meant to shock and to shake the society, to not just create an awakening of conscience, but to force a choice, saying that like if you want peace, if you want to get back to a stable, healthy society, you are going to have to behave justly and rightly. So, you need the right leaders, you need the right message, and there's a lot more I can say on that, but it's really using those past social movements, particularly the civil rights movement, because it was, I don't want to make this claim if it's not factually true, but I'll say it and I'll correct myself later if research proves that it's false. But particularly in how Martin Luther King led it, it was really the only distinctively Christian social movement in American history. Okay, that's not exactly true because the temperance movement was also a Christian movement, but that was like conservative, reactionary Christianity that's like all just focused on people's personal morals and has nothing to say about like social justice and, making the world a more equal and better place and all that stuff. So, yeah. I also don't want to call it progressive Christianity because I don't think Christianity really lends itself well to political labels. Like I just follow Christ. And if that happens to sound progressive with how I'm articulating it, then so be it. But I don't see Christianity as being one or the other political label. I think Christ is just Christ and we have to let him be Christ. So yeah, I will get into more of that in later lives and in later videos. This is a good one. I think Christianity will survive. I think Christianity is stronger than any heretical movement within Christianity. And you know what proved that within the history of the church? I mean, there's the broader movement, right? Jesus did his own reformation of Judaism and creating the faith that we now call Christianity today. But the truth of God's word will always resist corruption. And if you think our circumstances are bleak, I mean, that church was isolated, small, endangered, oppressed, persecuted on all sides for 3 centuries, and it still survived and ended up spiritually and psychologically, at least, conquering the empire that had oppressed it so much. And then also within the history of the church, the later history of the church itself, the Reformation proved that. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church had become utterly corrupt. And God decided to raise up a figure like Martin Luther to introduce some very needed corrections in the Western Christian church. Martin Luther, far from being perfect himself, had a lot of his own troubling beliefs, but he understood the essence of the gospel, justification by faith, et cetera, better than like any of his contemporaries. And God used him in a really powerful way to restore those teachings to the church. And I really think the more that I reflect on the history, not just the history of the church, but the words and the life of Jesus, I'm convinced that Christianity fundamentally is at its core, at its truest essence, it's a religion that is it's a constant spiritual revolution. Until Jesus gets back and he ushers in, the new kingdom and everything. There really is no point where we reach like this stasis, this equilibrium, where it's like, okay, we converted all these people and we built these institutions and now we're kind of done. The second that you start thinking like that, or the church starts resembling that, getting very comfortable in its ways, getting stagnant, that's when another reformation, that's when another spiritual revolution is needed in the church. Like, realistically, probably every generation should be having its reformation type moment, because in every generation and every age, there are always some biases or subtle heresies that are introduced, particularly once Christianity becomes institutionalized. In the same way that once the Jewish law and state was institutionalized, they became enemies of the truth of God's word. The same thing happened to the Christian church before they had institutionalized, when they were just like a ragtag band of people living on the margins of Roman society. They were a lot closer to the spiritual truth than when they formed in alliance with political power. They built all these beautiful churches and grand institutions. And now we're obviously seeing another version of that with the evangelical Christian church and their alliance with political power. The further you go down that road, the less you're actually in tune with the real essence of the teachings of Christ and the Bible. So every generation, particularly anytime Christianity starts becoming institutionalized like that, there should always be some revolutionary reformation spirit. I don't believe a true Christian can be a secular political leader. I agree on the secular part. They can't be a secular leader, but they can certainly be a political leader. And the evidence I'll cite for that, once again, unsurprisingly, Martin Luther King. He was not elected to anything, of course, but he was certainly a political leader, and by far the most transformative political leader of the 20th century. Maybe with the exception of, I'll give FDR, but again, certainly the most influential person that has never held political office in American history. Like the only other people on his level were literal presidents, even in the time that he lived. So he proved that you actually can be a true Christian and not just a political leader, but an effective and transformative political leader. So there's just so much to learn from his example, and you guys will be hearing me talk about him a lot more. And yeah, you're not alone. Like I said, I struggle with this too. But this is why, as you mentioned in the comment, and how chapter 4 of Proverbs tells us, we just got to guard our hearts. The fact they are two things: they are noticing that and expressing real contrition over that shows that your heart is sensitive to the leading of God. So just keep leaning into that. Keep leaning into that feeling, because that is where the rivers of life flow. And Deb, you had a similar point that, yeah, it is hard to be loving, particularly to people who are so full of hatred, but that is what they are trying to do. One of my favorite movies, and I share it with a couple friends of mine here at the law school, The Dark Knight. I know a very basic answer, but I think it's thematically, there are a lot of things I love about the movie, but thematically it's also very rich. But what I love at the end is how basically Batman exposes that the whole plot, the whole idea of the Joker and the chaos and the anarchy and the terror that he brings is to make everybody like him. He wants to be bad, and that's opposite the whole. If I'm spoiling the movie for you, you've had like close to 2 decades to watch it now, so I don't feel that bad. But anyway, the point is, and you see this in the whole corruption arc of Harvey Dent, right? That is what people like the Joker, both in real life and in fiction, serve to do. Trump wants to make us all as bitter and hateful and divisive and nasty as he is. That's why I said in how I ended my video on the evangelicals, I said, those who put their trust in idols will become like them. Like that is their goal, to transform you into the image of the thing that you're worshiping. And part of your worship is what you pay attention to, what you give energy to, while Christ is trying to transform us into his image by keeping our eyes stayed on him. Right? Like Peter walking on water on the boat. He's like, look at Jesus, not the waves. In that process, as you walk step by step with God, you are being transformed into the image and likeness of God. But the more you're looking at other things and giving those things your energy, giving them your time, letting them take up real estate in your hearts and minds, you're being conformed in their image as well. And that's what Trump wants us all to be, whether he knows it or not. He wants everyone to be just like him: greedy, selfish, vain, angry, hateful, divisive. So we, particularly as the Christian resistance to Trump, have to be the people who are on the front lines, not just externally, but far more importantly and primarily internally, building up defenses and resistance to that. I agree with this, Blood Rain, and it was actually a bit of a it was a back and forth I was getting into with someone on one of my videos, again, who had made the point. They're like, oh, I'm supporting Trump because he supports, Republican or conservative policies. And I'm like, well, one, the issue that I have with Trump, it's antecedent to policy. It's more foundational and fundamental to policy. Before we can talk about policy, we have to talk about character, right? We're not just talking about the policy of immigration or whatever it is, abortion, LGBT, whatever the issue is. It's that regardless of the policies you support, even if they're policies that I like, if your character is deeply flawed and defective, I cannot in good conscience as a Christian vote for you. Even less so, I cannot vote for you explicitly because of said Christian beliefs. This is where the moral abyss of Trumpism, particularly with its association with Christians, gets so corrupt, because what they're basically willing to say, because take the principle to its logical extreme. Who can't you vote for if they just give you what you want on abortion, if they give you what you want on gay marriage or LGBT issues, if they give you what you want in immigration? Can you vote for a child molester? Can you vote for a rapist? Can you vote for a murderer? Like what is the line? And if so, why? If your character is not right, I as a Christian, and this is why I love Jesus. And this is why you just hear the words he's saying. You're like, this man was truly sent by God. Because all of it holds up, where he's like, he explained a very simple moral principle. He said, listen, a bad tree cannot bear good fruit, and a good tree doesn't bear bad fruit. What does that mean? There is no such thing in Christian theology, as explained by Jesus Christ, as saying, I'm going to do a deal with an evil person to get a good thing. What Jesus is saying to us is, no matter what that person promises you, no matter what that thing is, if the source is evil, if the person is evil, the result will also be evil. He said, be not deceived. God can't be mocked. So as a person sows, that too shall they reap. You can't cheat the spiritual law. So there's no such thing as getting some person with a character as defective as Trump and saying that, okay, well, despite all the horrible things he is and says and does, he's still going to result in this positive political change. Spiritually, according to the laws that Jesus Christ laid out, that is impossible. It cannot happen. These are the temptations that Jesus himself overcame when he was in the wilderness and Satan was tempting him. He's like, yeah, just bow down to me and I'll make you Lord over all of the things. He's like, no, I can't sell out my integrity in order to get these little trinkets or to get these things that people might think are good. And you might say, okay, well, maybe you just do the bow. And then once you have all that political power, Jesus, you can use it for whatever good you want, right? Well, one, Jesus is already, the Son of God, already King of Kings. So he doesn't need anyone to give him anything. But more fundamentally, even if he did, he realizes that at a fundamental spiritual level, that no matter what he was promised, there was no good that could come out of a literal deal with the devil. So, guys, as I always do, I went over time again, but that's just because your comments and engagement are so good. And yes, Native Voice, thank you for bringing it back to King. I agree. We are missing voices like him. I think we could all do a lot of good in just studying his example, and I'll have more about it later. Luckily, this paper that I'm writing, when I'm done, because I know I've talked to you guys a lot about it, and I will be talking a lot about it just casually, and particularly in these lives. I'll hopefully be able to circulate a copy so you guys can read it and let me know what you think, because it's interesting. But before I go, as I always want to do, I just want to give one shout out to my patrons, Chance, Deb, and new this week, Ron. Your support of the channel really means a ton to me. As I always say at the end of these lives, like I said, right now this thing is totally funded by you guys, and the more that it's funded by the patrons, the more I can speak the truth independently, without fear, without compromise. Because my long-term vision for this is, I want you guys to be the audience. I want you guys to be the boss. I don't want to be beholden to any other people than the truth seekers and the people who are genuinely interested in working this stuff out together. Because I do believe that this is part of our calling, particularly for those of us who are Christians. Like, we are spending the time necessary to talk about these things, to ask the hard questions, to repair the world, right? To be that ministry of reconciliation that Jesus talked about. So anything that the people can spare, I'm always very grateful for. And I really appreciate everyone who was able to make time to come here, to ask questions, to engage. I will be doing this again, same time next week, Monday, 7 p.m. And thank you guys all. I'm seeing you in the comments. I thank every one of you who are also thanking me, but also for the people who are not commenting, who are just watching at home, listening. I really appreciate the engagement, guys. I really appreciate the support. And yeah, let's keep at it. Let's keep guarding our hearts. Let's keep trying to be the salt and the light, and let's keep the conversation going. Always feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, you should see all the links in my socials and my videos. The email for Truth is Speaking is also on my homepage on YouTube, so reach out to me if there's ever anything you want to talk about or mention. Love hearing from you guys. And I do have a video that just dropped today, right before this live. It was supposed to come out at the end of last week, but my editor had a health emergency, so it got delayed by a couple days. So this one is dropped. This one just dropped, I think, at 5 p.m. Today. We'll have another drop later this week to make up for the week that we lost. So yeah, please go watch, support, let me know what you guys think. And yeah, we will be back next week at 7 p.m. And thank you guys all so much. With that, Truth is signing off. Love you guys.